Great pleasure to welcome Rubrik to the Cloud Conference 2021, and a great pleasure to welcome all the way from the UK, Vileen Dhutia, who's the head of sales for the EMEA region at Rubrik. Vil has been working in the IT and security industry for over 20 years, so he's really been, we'll call you a veteran, but you're an evangelist for emerging technology trends and staying ahead of the curve and the emerging threats that are out there. Vil, great to have you with us, and it's great to meet you. Tell us a little bit about Rubrik and yourself and your role at Rubrik. I mean, you must have seen some interesting things in the last 2 decades.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the market changes a lot. Firstly, Rubrik is definitely one of the innovative solutions that when I chose to come to Rubrik 4 years ago was very much about what they were doing in the space of security. I think over the last couple of decades, certainly my experience of security is that there's a lot of entrants and a lot of innovators and a lot of vendors that come to market and a lot of new trends that come about. But my role at Rubrik is actually to focus around how we can work with customers around how security objectives can be met when it comes to data and application recovery, specifically from secure backups. And effectively, that's what Rubrik does, is to help customers to achieve some security objectives, but actually with infrastructure challenges that are met by the platform. And actually my role is effectively to look after our security proposition across the EMEA market. So I get a lot of engagements with lots of different kinds of customers, small, medium, and large, and across many sectors and across many regions. So I'm quite privileged to be able to get insights around the challenges that customers are seeing, and really just to understand, what's common and what's abnormal in those sectors and markets.
Hey, well, I mean, it sounds like you've got a great role there. Fascinating. I mean, you must be seeing some really interesting things happening in the market at the moment, just in terms of cloud data management. And I imagine that, COVID-19, I mean, we're 18 months into this remote working environment. It must have been something really interesting to see. What kind of trends are you seeing when it comes to cloud data management?
It's a really good question, and I should say thanks for the welcome to the conference. I mean, the topic of the conference is so relevant because the trends I see, I think I've seen certainly in the most recent, let's say 18 months to maybe 3 years, I've seen 4 clear trends. You've mentioned one, which is the hybrid cloud movement with the flexible working. Combining those two things, we see, especially has been accelerated during COVID-19. The pandemic has moved customers' data away from the traditional data centers. If we look at Office 365 or Microsoft 365, I think it's had a 10-fold increase in adoption, something like 200 to 300 million users now. AWS, Azure, the hyperscalers, Google, etc., are getting so strong with their buying power and their flexibility that they provide customers. It means that cloud repositories for cost-effective and secure storage, as well as migrating apps and databases into the cloud, is really possible now. 3 or 4 years ago, I think that started with non-transient data that we saw with things like long-term backups. But now we're seeing key applications in the cloud. And of course, in terms of what Rubrik does, we protect that data. So being able to protect it, whether it's on-prem, in the cloud, or 365, is one of the key things that we brought to market. The next trend that I think I'm seeing is really the digital transformation requiring cloud tools such as Power BI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, which actually goes into the security side of my job. So cyber criminals are effectively adopting these technologies, and what we're seeing is that customers have to stay one step ahead of the game. It's a cat and mouse game, particularly as our data moves outside of the traditional walls, traditional perimeters of our data center, and those physical parameters or physical perimeters are no longer relevant. Customers have to stay on top of that as they see this need to compete with digital transformation. The third trend, I think, is being driven by awareness of data privacy and regulations. Of course, in South Africa, we have the POPI Act, but organizations have to abide by global regulations such as GDPR and PCI DSS standard, and that brings about a number of considerations. And of course, if you're in finance or utilities, maybe you have some sector-specific regulations to be concerned as well. But the consequences of not abiding to those regulations can be damaging for organizations from a legal, a PR, and a fines perspective. And then I think the fourth trend is this digital pandemic of ransomware attacks. I mean, while the whole world is having to transition to remote working and enabling customers to be able to continue working whilst travel is limited, and whilst we're really concerned about how we move people around, the ransomware attacks are just exponentially accelerated. And I think specifically a few years ago with the WannaCry type of ransomware, targeting customers that still had XP, it was vulnerability based. Now we're seeing that move to targeting the backups. And again, with the move to cloud, with the protection of this data on-prem cloud 365 becomes so much harder. And again, that's what Rubrik specifically addresses in our secure and automated hybrid cloud data protection. And we have this built-in ransomware recovery capability to ensure that customers are not only able to recover, but actually managing their sensitive data assets correctly. And I think those four trends are driving a lot of different behavior in the last couple of years. So yeah, it's an exciting time to be working in security, and it's definitely very valuable to work with customers that are managing their data in those ways.
That's very, very interesting. I mean, certainly when you talk about the security of the ransomware, certainly that appears to be this Achilles heel in this remote working environment. When you look at those trends that you highlighted, how do they relate specifically to South Africa? I mean, the POPI Act came into law just a few months ago. I mean, that's very relevant and quite scary. But when you look at South Africa per se, what do you see?
So you're right. I mean, it was only July this year, I think, POPI Act came into play. But I would say there's been a couple of things. A recent study that I read from IBM shows the average cost of a ransomware attack in South Africa cost companies an average of 46 million rand per incident. So that takes into account the data breaches, the legal, regulatory, technical activity costs. So you tell me, is it relevant to South Africa? I think absolutely. The challenge that we solve is universal. So the ability to recover from a ransomware attack fast. And globally, customers are looking at their ransomware remediation. They're building incident response teams and workflows. Organizations are actively reviewing their recovery capability outside of their typical financial budget cycles, whether it's looking at refreshing the backup technology or improving their security tools with SIEM tools and SOAR tools and the ability to manage the forensics to reduce data impact and loss in that recovery situation. In this region, in South Africa, we actually see the trends coming up in probably three sectors. Higher education, finance, and utilities are the sectors I think we see, or I would say utilities infrastructure companies are the specifics. And then you've got the POPI Act and its relevance to how we protect against fines and infringements, as well as, again, the legal, PR, customer trust issues, as most attacks now are involving data exfiltration. However, I think there's also a cultural aspect. So, backups are fundamental to a recovery, and infrastructure teams typically look after backups, but they're being tasked with securing backups. So to ensure that they can recover an attack. So these same teams that are used to saving money, every year storage gets cheaper, so I buy more storage with the same amount of money, or my budget stays the same and I have to buy, or my budget shrinks and I have to continue with the same amount of storage. I think people recognize there's no such thing as a cheap padlock that is reliable. So on the flip side of that is the security teams are used to spending money to improve the posture, and then being able to operationalize the spending from a tool set to actually implementation. There's a big cultural aspect of bringing those two teams together to build an incident response against a ransomware. And probably the other thing we see is a geographic and local implementation of DR plans. So if you think of DR, it used to be based on, let's say, low probability, high impact events like a fire or a flood in a data center. Of course, in South Africa, power outages are probably more common than they are in London. But I would say that the key high probability, high impact event is ransomware, which means our DR plans need to now consider that incident recovery and helping customers to simulate, test, and recover from these incidents so that they know they can recover when the real thing comes. That's probably I guess, the specifics to the region that I'm seeing.
Very, very interesting. I mean, we see that Rubrik has great traction in the market right now. There's a lot of people talking about the services you guys are offering. You certainly have a very unique advantage. Why do you think this is? What is Rubrik doing right in the market at the moment?
I think the first thing that I would say is that we align to the megatrends, and we have done from our inception of automation, cloud, and security. But fundamentally, our time to value, i.e., how fast can an organization operationalize our technology? That removes the traditional barriers of change and reduces the overall risk across hybrid environments. Legacy backups are complex, and that makes them hard to secure and automate. And yet, until we came to market, improvements in that area have pretty much been stagnant for most companies. And 4 years ago, when I joined Rubrik, that was the driver for me to join Rubrik, is that we really removed the barriers of change. It was easy to implement. But now, in the security space, where I'm responsible, the native integrations with solutions from Palo Alto Networks in the Cortex solution set, integrations with ServiceNow, Microsoft 365, VMware, NetApp, AWS, Azure, those massively reduce the project risk of change as well, because we natively integrate. Ransomware has pushed organizations to review recovery plans, like I was saying, and understand the shortfalls of legacy backup, and the flexible working movement has meant that Rubrik can really help organizations across all surface areas where their data sits and all platforms, reducing the silos of technology and actually helping those teams in their skill sets towards automation and cloud, which is really a bigger impact. I think in South Africa there is an impact. There's an appetite to do more with less resources and think outside of the box. And that helps customers move away from legacy technology debt. So, it's great working with customers in this region. I really enjoy it.
Wow, that's fascinating. Now, talking about Microsoft, I mean, Microsoft recently announced taking an equity stake in Rubrik. Why do you think this is, and what does it mean for Rubrik and its customers?
I mean, look, firstly, it's a great accolade. The investment shows that as part of their own published investment in cyber defense to support the US government initiatives, they've chosen Rubrik to partner with and to invest in. They believe in our approach and the capabilities so much that they've taken an equity stake in us. That's a great accolade and a great testament to what we've been building, right? But I think in combination with that investment, there's a couple of things that we've seen. With customers moving to 365, being able to ensure that we have jointly developed solutions, not just for 365 and Azure, but as customers continue to invest in Microsoft solutions, Rubrik will be the data protection partner alongside them. I mean, I've grown up like anyone seeing Microsoft as one of the biggest names in the IT sector. So, for Rubrik to get not just an investment, but also the partnership and the co-development of solutions is it's a brilliant accolade. It really underlines what we're doing. And it gives a lot of, I think it gives a lot of comfort to customers that are looking at Rubrik in the market and saying, is this the right solution for me? If our strategy is aligned to the cloud, then, Microsoft Azure obviously is a big part of customers' future. We can align to Rubrik because we know they're in step together, which is, is a great comfort factor for customers as well.
No, I think it's absolutely awesome, and congratulations. I mean, just out of interest, how does it actually work, with 365 and in that Azure data center? I mean, where does the technology actually sit, and how does it work? I'm interested. If that's too technical, because I was trying, as you were saying that, I think that's pretty amazing that that Rubrik is right embedded in this technology. But how does it actually work?
So the first thing that we did when we came to market 7 years ago was to have the principles of security within the platform. So that meant that we wanted to be security first as a platform. So we started by protecting on-premises workloads and enabling customers to natively put that securely into the cloud. And AWS and Google and Azure are obviously the hyperscalers, but we saw a huge uptake of Microsoft. When we started looking at the problem of customers protecting the data in the cloud, we wanted to make sure that it was cloud native. By that, what we didn't want to do was take traditional IT infrastructure and lift and shift it to the cloud, because customers weren't doing that with their apps either. So what we did was we recognized that we need to have this unified capability to protect a customer's data wherever it is. So we built an SLA policy engine. That SLA policy engine enables customers to be really declarative with how they protect their data. How often do you want to back it up? Where do you want to store it? How long do you want to keep it? I mean, those are not technical questions, but the technical problem underneath it is managed by Rubrik. So this automated SLA engine that we built enables you to declaratively say what you want to back up and how, and then push that SLA engine out across all your workloads. So it natively protects Azure workloads, natively protects 365 workloads in a SaaS-driven cloud-native capability that is also hugely efficient. So it reduces costs as well. So yeah, we're really proud of what we've built, but I think testament of that is the customer case studies that we're seeing coming out from every sector that we're working with and every region. So yeah, I think it's a really valid question. Hopefully not too technical as an answer.
No, I was fascinated. I mean, well done. I mean, it really gives me as a customer like peace of mind to know that in the background this is actually happening. So as organizations gear up their defense systems against ransomware that we've been talking about, what are the three most critical weapons that you would advise customers pursue? I mean, that they should have these weapons that they need to have in their armor. It's almost like a military defense outlook that you have to protect yourself these days.
I mean, it absolutely is. I mean, look at the nation state attacks that we're seeing, right? If you look at things like Colonial Pipeline, you know, it took down the eastern seaboard and the ability to get fuel in the US, which is a huge national infrastructure impact. So, you know, it's hugely important to treat this as warfare. And, you know, from a security perspective, I think it's difficult to have just three weapons because there's a lot of things you can do as a customer to secure your data. But if I had to boil it down to three things that we're seeing customers take on board from what we bring to market, the first is reducing risk ahead of an attack. You know, you don't leave your front door open. You don't leave your keys to your car sitting next to your car. You know, you don't. You make sure that you've locked your doors, you've got your CCTV turned on, you're looking at it, you know, you're aware of your security posture. And data is exactly the same. So reducing risk ahead of an attack is know your sensitive data assets, know who has access to them, and secure them appropriately. The second thing is making sure that you can recover. So assume breach. You know, zero trust is all about making sure that you authenticate and authorize everything that touches that data. And I think zero trust is obviously very well known as terminology in the market, particularly as the US government has been mandating it to US organizations. But what we're seeing is that if you can assure your recovery, so test it and run incident response around it, making sure that you can have as an example, your backups in a bunker with Rubrik, that's a really important aspect of the armory, I would say, in your defense. So the third thing that I would say is once you have been hit, being able to make sure that the impact to your organization is minimized. Minimize the data loss because you know what has been impacted. Minimize the data loss because you know what to recover. But then being able to report to the correct authorities what PII has been impacted. You know, I was speaking to a university in South Africa not too long ago. And of course, they don't have PII, personally identifiable information, that just relates to POPI. They have data that relates to GDPR because they'll have European students. They'll have data from Australia and the Australia Privacy Act equivalent. They'll have data from Brazil, you know, because they have Brazilian students. So, you know, we have to now look at how we reduce the impact of fine infringement and customer trust issues. So those are the top three, but there's lots of other aspects, which is, you know, comes back to operationalizing the tool sets that you buy. And it goes back to that minimal time to value, you know, reduce the time to value of the solutions that you have, make sure that they're simple and effective, which is going to be better in the defense against ransomware.
Excellent advice, and really, those three pillars that you just mentioned. I mean, they sound like air defense systems, and but you mentioned bunkers and everything. But you're quite right. It is war out there, and you have to be protected and follow the protocols and do whatever you can to protect yourself. Vileen Dhutia, the head of sales for EMEA at Rubrik, thank you so much for joining us at this year's My Broadband Conference. Really, it's great to have you at this cloud conference and really have your insights that you've shared with us. Really appreciate your time, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach. Great to meet you.